She waited until the dessert table was full and the whole family was watching. That was the thing about Renata Voss. She had a gift for timing. She understood that humiliation lands harder when there is an audience, when there is nowhere to look, when the person being discussed has no polite exit and no reasonable way to respond without making it worse. She set down her champagne flute, turned to my husband's aunt, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear, and said that she had always believed a woman should bring something to a marriage other than ambition and a pretty face. She did not use my name. She didn't need to. Every person in that garden turned to look at me. I was standing 6 feet away holding a glass of iced water and a small plate of strawberries I had not yet touched. I looked at Renata. I looked at the circle of faces arranged around her like a panel. I looked at my husband, Thomas, who was across the lawn talking to his cousin and had not heard any of it. And I made a decision I had been quietly preparing for longer than any of them knew. I smiled at her. I said, "You're absolutely right that a woman should bring something to a marriage." I let that sit for exactly 1 beat. "Give me just a moment," I said. I excused myself. I walked to the edge of the garden. I sent a single text message to my assistant, Jordan, who was parked in a car at the end of the driveway. The text said, "Now, before I tell you what Jordan walked into that garden carrying, and what happened to Renata Voss's champagne flute when she read page 1, tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments, because this is a story about what happens when the woman everyone dismissed brings receipts. Literal ones. My name is Claire. I am 33 years old. To the Voss family, I am the woman Thomas married 3 years ago without adequate consultation. I am the woman who appeared at their Thanksgiving table with good manners and no traceable pedigree. I am the woman Renata has referred to, in various configurations, as ambitious, strategic, and not quite what we had in mind for Thomas. Always with the particular warmth of someone who believes cruelty is more palatable when it is delivered quietly. The 11 members of my board of directors, to the 340 employees across 4 offices, and to the 23,000 individual shareholders who own stock in Veller Consumer Technologies. The company I founded at 26, took public at 30, and which closed its last fiscal year with a market capitalization of $2.3 billion. I am the founder, the CEO, and the largest single shareholder. The Voss family's total combined net worth, including Thomas's trust fund, his father's commercial real estate holdings, and the vineyard Renata mentioned every third sentence as though it were a personality trait, was approximately $340 million. I knew this because my CFO had run the numbers as a matter of routine due diligence before Thomas, and I got engaged. I had never mentioned this to Renata. She had never asked. To understand what happened at that reunion, you have to understand the first time I met Renata Voss. It was at a dinner Thomas had arranged 6 weeks after we started dating. A restaurant he chose carefully, a place his family liked, a place that would feel like home to them and like an audition to me. I understood that going in. I had dressed accordingly. I had done the research. Renata had arrived 12 minutes late, which I later understood was not carelessness but architecture. She wanted us seated and waiting. She wanted to walk into a room that was already arranged around her absence. She sat down, looked at me with the focused attention of a woman conducting an appraisal, and asked what I did. I said I ran a technology company. She asked what kind. I said consumer software. Data infrastructure, primarily. She nodded in the way people nod when they have heard an answer, and found it insufficient. She asked if Thomas had told me about the vineyard. I said he had mentioned it. She spent the next 20 minutes telling me about it anyway, in the specific detail of a person who believes that property is character. She did not ask a second question about my work. At the end of the evening, while Thomas was getting the car, she touched my arm and said, "You're very charming, Claire." Thomas has always been drawn to interesting women. She paused. "We just want to make sure he's also being sensible." I thanked her for dinner. I drove home, and I thought about the term sheet sitting on my desk for our Series C funding round. $180 million. Closing in 11 days. I thought about the version of myself at 22, in a studio apartment with a whiteboard covered in architecture diagrams and a laptop running 4 browser tabs and a simulation I had been refining for 8 months. Absolutely certain I was building something real. Absolutely terrified I was wrong. I thought she will not be the thing that breaks this. She was not. But she kept trying. Over 3 years of marriage, Renata had developed a repertoire. She referred to my work as Claire's projects with a possessive affection that made it sound like I was maintaining a garden. She asked Thomas at family dinners whether I was still doing the tech thing the way you ask someone whether they are still taking that pottery class. She sent me articles about work-life balance with handwritten notes that said "just thinking of you," and which arrived, with suspicious timing, whenever a press piece ran about the company. She told people I was driven. She said it the way you say complicated. Like it was a warning. At last year's reunion, she had suggested, in a group conversation about the next generation of the Voss family, that Thomas might want to think about stability and roots, and whether his lifestyle currently supported the kind of family they had always envisioned for him. I was standing 4 feet away. She did not lower her voice. She also did not look at me. I had gone home that evening, and I had made a decision. The next time Renata Voss said something like that in public, I was not going to be quiet. I was going to be prepared. The Voss family reunion was held every year at Thomas's uncle's property in Connecticut. 40 acres, a restored farmhouse, a catering tent that could hold 80 people, and a garden that had been photographed for a regional lifestyle magazine 3 years running. It was, objectively, beautiful. I had arrived with Thomas at 11 in the morning. I had worn a dress I liked. I had brought a host as gift. I had kissed cheeks and answered questions about whether we had considered moving to Connecticut and whether I found the city exhausting and whether Thomas was eating enough. I had done all of this with the patient attention of a woman who has learned that the best armor in a room like this is competence disguised as warmth. Jordan was parked at the end of the driveway. Jordan had been my assistant for 4 years. She was 28 years old, had a master's degree in communications, and possessed the specific quality I valued most in a person: the ability to walk into any room and make whatever was happening in that room feel inevitable. I had briefed her 2 days before the reunion. I had told her there was a possibility I would need her. I had told her to be ready. She had a box in the trunk of the car. Inside the box were 63 copies of Veller Consumer Technologies' most recent annual report. Full color, professionally bound, the kind of document that costs $18 per unit to produce, and which we distributed to institutional investors and board members at our annual shareholder meeting. The cover featured a photograph of our main campus. The first interior page featured a letter from the CEO. The letter was signed with my name. Page 4 contained our market capitalization figure. Page 7 contained our year-over-year revenue growth. Page 12 contained a photograph of me at our last product launch, in front of a wall of screens, in the specific posture of a person who owns every room she walks into because she has spent 11 years building the right to. I had not planned to use the box. I had planned to leave the reunion without needing it. Renata had other ideas. It happened at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the time because I checked my watch immediately afterward, the way you check a timestamp when you understand that what just happened is going to be a reference point for a very long time. The dessert table had been set up near the garden's east wall. Tiered trays, a chocolate fountain Thomas's cousin had insisted on, small plates with the Voss family monogram. 80 people circulating, the specific social warmth of a family that had money and knew how to perform ease. I was standing near the hydrangeas with Thomas's Aunt Patricia, who was kind and asked genuine questions, and was the one member of this family I had always liked without qualification. Renata had gathered a small circle near the champagne station. Her sister, 2 cousins I recognized but had never properly met. A woman named Constance, who had known the family for 30 years and who Renata treated as a chorus. I was not part of the circle. I was adjacent to it. Near enough to hear. Far enough to be deniable. Renata said she had been thinking about legacy. About what it meant to build something that lasted. About the difference between people who understood the weight of a family name and people who were attracted to what that name could provide. She said it beautifully. She always did. Constance made a sound of agreement. Renata set down her champagne flute. She turned, not quite toward me, but with the geometric precision of a woman who wanted her words to land exactly where she was aiming, and said that she had always believed a woman should bring something to a marriage other than ambition and a pretty face. The circle went quiet. Patricia, beside me, went very still. I looked at Renata. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the studio apartment and the whiteboard and the 8 months of simulations. I thought about 340 employees whose health insurance I signed off on every year. I thought about the morning I rang the opening bell at the stock exchange and stood on that platform and thought about every person who had ever looked at me and seen a category instead of a company. I smiled. I said, "You're absolutely right that a woman should bring something to a marriage." I sent the text. Jordan appeared at the garden entrance 4 minutes later. She was carrying the box with the particular ease of someone who does not want you to think about what is in it until the moment is right. She was dressed simply. She moved through the reunion with the quiet confidence of a person who belongs in every room she enters, because I had specifically hired her for that quality. She found me near the hydrangeas. She set the box on the garden table beside me. She opened it. She began distributing annual reports. Not urgently. Not dramatically, with the calm efficiency of someone setting out programs before a performance. She placed one on the table beside Renata's champagne flute. She offered one to Constance. She worked the circle with the unhurried precision of a woman who had been briefed and was executing. Renata looked at the document in front of her. She looked at the cover. She looked at the Veller Consumer Technologies logo, which had been on the cover of a technology publication 6 months ago, which had been referenced in the Wall Street Journal's quarterly earnings roundup, which was, if you followed the sector, not an obscure name. She opened to the first page. The CEO letter. She read the signature. She looked up at me. I was watching her with the same calm attention she had spent 3 years directing at me. I had spent a long time practicing that expression. The one that does not perform triumph. The one that simply holds the room. Thomas's uncle Edmund, who had been passing the dessert table, picked up a copy. He read the cover. He turned to page 4. He looked at the market capitalization figure, $2.3 billion, with the focused attention of a man who understood numbers professionally. He looked at me. He said, "Claire. Just my name. The way you say something when you are recalibrating an entire filing system in real time." Thomas had crossed the lawn. He had noticed Jordan. He had seen the distribution. He picked up a copy from the table with the expression of a man who was only now understanding the specific shape of what his wife had been quietly building alongside their marriage. He turned to page 12. He looked at the photograph. He looked at me. I looked back at him evenly. Renata had not moved. She was still holding the annual report with both hands. The champagne flute was untouched beside her. Her sister leaned over to look at the page she was on. Constance had turned to page 7. The revenue growth chart. The garden had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when a large group of people simultaneously understands that the room they are in is not the room they thought it was. Edmund said, "How long?" I said, 11 years. We went public 3 years ago. He said, "During which time you've been coming to this reunion." "Every year," I said. He almost smiled. Not cruelly, with the particular appreciation of a man who respected a long game. Renata set the annual report down on the table. She did not look at me immediately. She looked at the garden, at the caring tent, at the 80 people who were now, with varying degrees of subtlety, watching the corner of the garden where she was standing. Then she looked at me. Her expression was doing something I had not seen it do in 3 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases and Connecticut reunions. It was working. Visibly, quietly, internally working. She said, "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't ask. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. Because it was not what I had expected. I had imagined, in the abstract version of the scene I had rehearsed in the car on the drive up, that I would feel something large. Vindication. The specific satisfaction of a long account finally settling. The clean arithmetic of years of patience paying a dividend. What I actually felt was quieter than that. And older. I felt the specific tiredness of a person who has spent a very long time being misread, and has finally, in one afternoon, made the misreading impossible to sustain. It was not triumphant. It was more like setting down something heavy that I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it had weight. Thomas came to stand beside me. He did not say anything immediately. He put his hand on my back, not a performative gesture, not for the room, just the quiet weight of a person making contact. He had known I had a company. He had known it was significant. He had not known, because I had not shown him the full architecture of it, because I had kept it in a separate compartment, the way you keep something precious away from things that might damage it, exactly what significant meant. He said quietly, I should have paid more attention. I said, yes. He said, I'm going to. I believed him, not because the afternoon had resolved everything, but because I had spent enough time reading people to know the difference between a person performing accountability and a person actually feeling the ground shift beneath them. His ground had shifted. We would have a real conversation later. In the car, probably. The long kind. The kind that required the particular privacy of motion, of going somewhere, of not being in a garden with 80 people and a chocolate fountain. But that was later. Renata approached me before we left. She waited until the crowd had thinned, until Thomas was saying goodbye to his uncle. She came to stand beside me near the hydrangeas where the afternoon had changed, and she was quiet for a moment in the way that precise people are quiet when they are choosing words with more care than usual. She said, I owe you an apology. I waited. She said, I made assumptions about you that were not fair. I made them early, and I held them longer than I should have. And I said things today and on other occasions that were unkind. She did not dress it up. She did not add qualifications. It was the most direct thing she had said to me in 3 years, and I recognized it for what it was, not warmth, not the beginning of friendship, but the specific integrity of a woman who, when she was wrong, was capable of saying so. I said, I appreciate that. She said, I didn't see you. No, I said. But I was here. She nodded once. She picked up her champagne flute. She walked back toward the farmhouse with the same straight posture she had carried into the garden that morning. Some things do not change in an afternoon. Nor should they. Jordan collected the remaining annual reports before we left. 61 of 63 copies distributed. 2 left in the box. I kept one. I gave the other to Patricia, who had been standing beside me when it started, and who had spent the rest of the afternoon with a small, private smile that she aimed mostly at the garden. Thomas drove home. I had the passenger window cracked. The Connecticut countryside moved past in its summer green. He asked me once, somewhere on the highway, why I had never told his family. I said I had told him. I had told him on our 4th date over dinner that I was building something serious. I had told him when we got engaged that my work was the most important thing I had ever made. I had told him every time he asked, and he had not always asked, but I had told him that what I did mattered and was growing and was mine. He had heard it. He had not always listened for what it meant. I told him I didn't say it as an accusation. I said it because I thought it was important to be accurate about what had happened, so we could be accurate about what came next. He said, what comes next? I said, you start asking better questions. I start giving you more complete answers. We meet somewhere in the middle, and we call it a marriage. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, that sounds like a fair deal. I said, I'm good at deals. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind I had fallen in love with before any of this, before Connecticut and reunions and champagne flutes, and the long, patient architecture of being underestimated by people who should have known better. I looked out the window. The annual reports were in Jordan's car behind us. The company was where it had always been. The board meeting was Tuesday. The Q3 projections were ahead of target. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The only thing that had changed was that 61 members of the Voss family now knew where to look.